The day Thomas Mercer walked into the executive offices of the Skylark hotel chain, the air in the room seemed to chill. Dressed in a sharply tailored suit, his shoes gleaming under the fluorescent lights, he strode in like he owned the world, which, to him, wasn't far from the truth. Thomas had built his empire through aggressive takeovers, never shying away from stepping on those beneath him. The Skylark was just another stepping stone in his collection of acquisitions, and he had no intention of slowing down. To him, this wasn't about rescuing a business or taking care of its people. The boutique hotel chain, known for its personal touch and luxury service, was nothing more than a ledger of numbers. And the first thing Thomas did when he examined those numbers was spot the problem: the salaries. Too high, too generous for people he considered easily replaceable. To Thomas, every employee, from the front desk staff to the managers, was expendable if it meant padding the company's bottom line. The first memo he sent out was short and brutal. Salaries were being slashed across the board by 20%, effective immediately. Thomas made sure to add, in his typical no-nonsense style, that anyone who had a problem with this decision was free to leave. There would be no room for negotiation, no soft landings for those who had worked hard to maintain Skylark's reputation for warmth and hospitality. Thomas didn't care about hospitality, he cared about profit margins. He didn't cut his own salary, of course. If anything, his pay would increase once the savings from the reduced wages began rolling in. In his mind, he was doing the right thing, trimming the fat from a bloated, inefficient machine. It didn't occur to him that this machine was built on the dedication and loyalty of the people he was now alienating. Within hours of the announcement, the hotel chain's corporate office was in turmoil. Conversations whispered in hallways, private meetings behind closed doors, tense phone calls. None of it was enough to change the reality of Thomas's decision. The first wave of resignation letters began arriving that same day, many of them from employees who had been with Skylark for over a decade. These were the people who had been the backbone of the company, who had shaped its culture of caring for both guests and staff alike. But now, they felt betrayed. Some left quietly, not wanting to waste breath on what they saw as a futile argument. Others made a point of airing their grievances to anyone who would listen. One assistant manager, who had been at the Skylark's flagship property for over 15 years, ripped off his name badge and threw it on his desk before storming out. Let him run this place into the ground, he spat at his colleagues on his way out the door. But Thomas didn't flinch. He expected this reaction, even welcomed it. To him, it only meant he was getting rid of those who lacked the stomach for real business. If they're leaving, they were never committed in the first place, he said to himself. He watched the resignations pile up with an air of detachment, as though the people walking out of the company were irrelevant cogs in a machine. There was no sentimentality in business. Only results. For the employees who chose to stay, the atmosphere shifted drastically. The once collaborative and close-knit team found themselves working longer hours to make up for the vacancies. Thomas had slashed not only the salaries but also the hiring budget, leaving them no chance to fill the roles that had been abandoned. The front desk staff, already overworked, found themselves doubling up on housekeeping duties. The housekeeping staff, stretched to the limit, were forced to skip their breaks just to keep up with guest demands. Meanwhile, Thomas watched it all unfold from his office, unconcerned. As long as the numbers continued to look good on paper, the human cost meant little to him. Thomas's assistant, May, tried to intervene, suggesting that perhaps cutting the wages all at once had been too harsh. "The employees are struggling, Thomas," she said softly during one of their meetings. "The guests are starting to notice. Complaints about service have gone up, and we've had several bad reviews online in just the last few days." Thomas barely looked up from his laptop. "And? You think I should start handing out raises because someone had to wait 5 minutes longer for their room service?" "No, of course not," May replied, choosing her words carefully. She had seen how quickly Thomas could dismiss someone who pushed him too far. "But morale is low. We could consider small incentives, maybe bonuses tied to performance. Thomas leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. You don't make a business profitable by handing out rewards for mediocrity, May. If they can't handle the workload, they can walk out the door like the rest of them. This place will run just fine without them. May swallowed her retort and nodded, making a mental note to tread even more lightly in the future. Thomas was not a man who valued compassion, and she knew better than to push her luck. But even she couldn't deny the strain the staff was under. It was only a matter of time before something snapped. The effects of Thomas's decisions weren't limited to the employees. Guests, once drawn to Skylark for its boutique charm and personalized service, began to notice the cracks. Rooms weren't as pristine, wait times at the restaurant increased, and the once friendly atmosphere had turned stiff and impersonal. More and more, customers found their requests going unanswered, their complaints met with a frustrated sigh or a half-hearted apology. Thomas was too focused on cutting costs to see the bigger picture. He believed that as long as the company remained afloat financially, everything else was secondary. But what he didn't understand was that Skylark's success had never been built on spreadsheets and bottom lines. It had been built on the trust and loyalty of the people who worked there. And now, that foundation was crumbling. As the weeks passed, more employees left, unable to cope with the pressure. Thomas's cold and detached management style had turned what was once a vibrant and thriving company into a place where people clocked in and out without any passion or care for the job. The heart of Skylark was dying, and Thomas, blind to the real damage he was causing, was too focused on his profits to see it. Thomas Mercer leaned back in his leather chair, twirling a pen between his fingers as his executive team droned on about the hotel's staffing shortages. The Skylark's workforce had dwindled to dangerous levels since his wage cuts, but that didn't bother him. In fact, he found it amusing that the staff hadn't toughened up to face the challenge. They were too soft, too attached to the cushy jobs they'd had before he came in and cleaned house. He would never admit it aloud, but he enjoyed watching them squirm under the pressure. We still haven't found anyone for the janitorial position, May said, her voice betraying a slight edge of frustration. We've put out listings, but no one's applying. The pay rate you approved is, well, let's just say it's not competitive. Thomas chuckled, low and dismissive. Competitive? We don't need to compete for someone to mop floors. There are a million people out there who'd kill for a job like that. You're just not looking in the right places. He turned his head slightly toward the window that faced the street. Outside, the city was buzzing with people going about their day, people Thomas considered beneath him. His eyes landed on a figure across the road, a woman bent over, picking up discarded bottles near the alley. Her clothes were worn, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. She moved with a sort of tired efficiency, sorting the bottles into a tattered bag slung over her shoulder. A slow smile crept across Thomas's face. There, he said, pointing lazily. There's your janitor. May followed his gaze, her brows furrowing in confusion. Excuse me? The woman out there. The one collecting bottles, Thomas said, waving his hand dismissively. Bring her in. She'll do the job for half of what we're offering, I guarantee it. The room fell silent. A few of the executives exchanged glances, unsure if he was serious. But Thomas's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with amusement. To him, this was sport, picking the most desperate person he could find and dangling an opportunity just to see if they would take it. It was a game, and he was the one pulling all the strings. May hesitated, the tension in her shoulders clear. Thomas, I don't think she's qualified. She doesn't even. May, Thomas interrupted, his tone light but cold. Are you questioning me? She swallowed hard, feeling the eyes of the room on her. No. I'll have someone bring her in. Minutes later, one of the security guards had crossed the street and returned with the woman. Up close, it was clear she had seen better days. Her clothes were frayed at the edges, and there were lines of exhaustion around her eyes. But there was also a quiet dignity about her, despite her circumstances. She stood in the doorway, clutching her bag of bottles, looking around the room with a steady, silent gaze. Thomas leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his eyes glinting with curiosity. "What's your name?" The woman didn't respond. She just continued to stare, her face unreadable. May, sitting beside Thomas, cleared her throat and gestured subtly. "I think she's deaf," May said quietly. Thomas's smile didn't waver. If anything, the revelation seemed to amuse him further. "Deaf? Well, that's interesting," he said, louder than necessary, as if raising his voice would help. He slowly exaggerated his words, as though mocking her disability. "Do you want a job?" The woman's eyes flickered, and she seemed to catch enough of what he was saying through his lips. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. "Good," Thomas said, leaning back again, satisfied. "You'll clean. Sweep the floors, scrub the bathrooms, whatever needs doing. Got it?" The woman nodded again, but this time with a hint of reluctance. May, watching the interaction with a knot in her stomach, wanted to intervene, to say something that would stop the slow-motion cruelty unfolding in front of her. But she knew better. Thomas wasn't the kind of man to tolerate dissent, especially not over something he found amusing. "You'll start tomorrow," Thomas continued, already looking bored with the exchange. "You'll get paid at the end of the week. And you'll do it for half of what the others were getting. No complaints, no excuses." The woman nodded once more, though the uncertainty in her eyes lingered. She glanced around the room, taking in the cold, indifferent stares of the other executives. No one seemed willing to meet her gaze, save for May, who managed a small, sympathetic smile. "Go with security," Thomas said, dismissing her with a wave. "They'll get you set up." The woman turned and followed the guard out, her shoulders stiff, her posture too proud for someone who'd just been humiliated. Once the door clicked shut behind her, Thomas let out a chuckle. "See," he said, looking around the room as if he had just won some grand victory. "Problem solved. You people just need to learn to think outside the box." The executives nodded, some more eagerly than others. May kept her eyes on her notepad, scribbling down meaningless notes to avoid saying anything that might spark Thomas's ire. She knew better than to push back in moments like this, but a bitter taste lingered in her mouth. As the meeting wrapped up, May found herself glancing back toward the door where the woman had exited. Iris. She hadn't spoken a word, hadn't asked for anything, and yet May couldn't shake the feeling that something about this situation was terribly wrong. The woman had agreed to work, but it wasn't out of gratitude or opportunity. It was out of necessity. Thomas saw that as his triumph, but to May, it felt like something had been broken in that moment, something fundamental about the way people should be treated. But in Thomas's world, necessity was just another tool he could manipulate, another way to bend people to his will. And as the door closed behind them, he was already moving on to the next item on his agenda, leaving Iris's silent agreement behind him like it was nothing. Iris arrived at the Skylark Hotel early the next morning, clutching the worn strap of her canvas bag, her few belongings tucked inside. The building loomed over her, a picture of polished luxury that seemed to belong to another world entirely. But Iris wasn't here to belong, she was here to work. She reminded herself of that as she stepped through the gleaming glass doors, the faint scent of expensive cleaning products hanging in the air. The front desk clerk barely glanced at her as she entered, his fingers tapping away on the computer in front of him. Iris hesitated for a moment, unsure of where to go, but the security guard from the previous day soon spotted her and waved her over. "Iris, right?" he said, his tone casual but distant. She nodded, offering him a small smile in return. His face softened, but only slightly. "Come on, I'll show you the supply closet and get you started." They walked through the quiet halls of the hotel, passing the pristine reception area, the gleaming marble floors that Iris knew she'd soon be scrubbing. The place was immaculate, but it was a quiet kind of perfect, the kind of clean that made guests feel like they could breathe easier, made them think they were being taken care of without ever seeing the people who made it that way. The security guard led Iris to a cramped supply closet tucked away behind one of the service hallways. He pointed to the mops, brooms, and buckets stacked neatly inside. "This is your territory. You'll get the daily cleaning checklist from the head of housekeeping, but basically, keep the public areas clean and tidy. Floors, windows, bathrooms, whatever's on the list." He paused, glancing at her to make sure she understood. Iris nodded, her hands gripping the strap of her bag. She didn't need the details. Cleaning was something she knew well. The guard, seeing she was ready to get started, gave her one last instruction before leaving. "And don't worry about Thomas. Well, just do the work, keep your head down, and you'll be fine." But keeping her head down was easier said than done. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Iris could feel the eyes on her the moment she began her rounds, pushing the cleaning cart down the hallways. The hotel staff, once busy in their own routines, seemed to always find a reason to pause and watch her, their murmurs barely concealed. "She doesn't even hear us," one bellhop said to the others, leaning against the wall as Iris passed by. "She's deaf, right? What's the point in talking to her?" Another laughed. "They got her from the street. Thomas probably didn't want to pay for anyone else." Iris heard only fragments, catching bits of their conversations when she saw their lips moving. But even when she couldn't hear them, the meaning was always clear. She could feel the mockery, the stares. The hotel staff treated her like she was invisible, or worse, like a nuisance they had to tolerate. Thomas, on the rare occasions she crossed paths with him, barely acknowledged her existence. When he did, it was with a smirk, as if he were watching some amusing sideshow he'd set up for his own entertainment. He never spoke to her directly, but the derision was clear in his expression. Still, Iris did what she had promised herself she would do. She worked. She pushed through the long shifts, scrubbing floors and wiping down mirrors with a quiet efficiency that went unnoticed by most. The hotel stayed immaculate, its surfaces gleaming, the result of Iris's unseen efforts. But no one said a word of thanks. No one acknowledged the work that made the place run as smoothly as it did. Though she remained mostly ignored, Iris's presence slowly began to shift things in the hotel. She took extra care in everything she did, going beyond the basic cleaning checklist. The lobby's marble floors shone brighter than before. The windows were spotless, and the bathrooms, which had once been the bane of many staff members, were now always pristine. She didn't rush her work, choosing instead to put meticulous effort into every task, though no one seemed to notice. At night, when the hotel was quieter and the guests had retreated to their rooms, Iris found solace in the stillness. She would mop the empty hallways, her movements rhythmic and steady, the repetitive nature of the work giving her time to think. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, work that she knew how to do, and do well. Even when the staff continued to treat her as little more than a fixture, Iris didn't let their indifference or cruelty get to her. She had long since learned to draw strength from within. Life had never been easy for her, and the Skylark was just another place where she had to endure. She had learned long ago that kindness wasn't always guaranteed, and acceptance didn't come easily. But that didn't stop her from doing the best she could with what she had. For all their snide comments and dismissive behavior, the staff began to notice something in Iris's absence, even if they didn't say it outright. On the rare occasion that she wasn't able to clean an area on time or something was overlooked, they would immediately grumble. A trash bin left unemptied. A smudge on a glass door. The tiniest imperfection was suddenly glaring. It was a strange paradox. Her presence was almost invisible, yet the moment her work wasn't done, the void was palpable. Iris, the quiet woman who moved like a ghost through the hotel, had become the foundation of the building's operation, though few would ever admit it. But as weeks passed, her routine settled in. Iris continued to work with the same quiet dignity, enduring the sidelong glances, the casual cruelty of a few staff members who still saw her as nothing more than cheap labor. She kept the hotel running smoothly, day in and day out, her contributions unspoken but undeniable. Through it all, Iris remained steady. She didn't need their approval or their acknowledgement. She simply did her job, and did it well, even if no one noticed. It didn't happen all at once, but bit by bit, the Skylark Hotel began to change. It wasn't anything that Thomas or the staff could immediately put their finger on, but the difference was undeniable. The halls gleamed just a little brighter, the air felt crisper, and even the common areas seemed to have more order than before. It wasn't magic, though it almost seemed like it. It was Iris. Every morning, Iris quietly clocked in and began her day just as she had from the start, pushing the same worn cart of cleaning supplies, gliding from room to room without making a sound. She worked with an intensity and focus that went largely unnoticed by those around her, but her efforts were making an impact. Iris wasn't just cleaning the hotel, she was transforming it, piece by piece. What started as routine maintenance began to evolve. Iris noticed things that others didn't, small imperfections, forgotten corners. She saw the cluttered storage rooms where supplies were haphazardly tossed, the poorly arranged furniture in the lobby that disrupted the flow of the room, and even the broken door handles or faulty light switches that no one had bothered to fix. These things spoke to her in a way no one else seemed to hear, and so she quietly took it upon herself to address them. It wasn't part of her job, strictly speaking, but Iris couldn't help herself. After all, the mess bothered her, and more than that, it was a challenge. One morning, as she entered the main supply room, the sight of it, the chaos of boxes piled on top of one another, cleaning solutions mixed with spare towels and broken light bulbs, was enough to make her pause. It was something most of the staff had learned to ignore, too busy with their own duties to bother sorting through the wreckage. But Iris, she couldn't look away. So, she set to work. On her own time, after finishing her regular rounds, she reorganized the room, labeling shelves, separating supplies, and even scrubbing the floor until it shone. She made space where there was none before, creating a system that made sense, that allowed the staff to find what they needed without having to dig through the clutter. No one asked her to do it. No one thanked her afterward, either. But Iris didn't mind. She wasn't doing it for recognition. Her efforts went unnoticed by most of the staff, though they certainly appreciated the suddenly pristine state of the supply room when they came in the next day. "About time someone cleaned up in here," one of the housekeepers muttered to no one in particular as she picked up fresh linens without having to wade through piles of junk. But Iris didn't stop there. If something was broken, and she could fix it, she did. Loose cabinet hinges, squeaky doors, burnt-out light bulbs, she tackled them all with quiet determination. She used the small toolkit that was kept in the back of the storage closet, teaching herself how to do basic repairs. Sometimes, it took her a few tries to get things right, but she wasn't afraid to make mistakes. The satisfaction of seeing things function properly again was all the reward she needed. One afternoon, Iris found herself in the staff lounge, a room that had long been neglected. The vending machine in the corner had been out of order for weeks, the chairs were always out of place, and a leak from the ceiling had created a water stain that no one had bothered to clean. She could have ignored it, after all, it wasn't her responsibility, but she didn't. By the end of the day, the chairs were arranged neatly, the stains scrubbed away, and she had somehow managed to get the vending machine back in working order. "Did maintenance finally fix that?" one of the clerks asked when the machine beeped back to life. The staff shrugged, assuming the repairs had been scheduled and completed by someone else. Iris, standing in the background, watched quietly, her hands wiping down the countertops as if nothing had happened. But it wasn't just about fixing things, it was about making the hotel a better place. Iris had a natural eye for detail, for design even. She noticed how the furniture in the lobby seemed to block the natural flow of traffic, creating awkward spaces that made guests uncomfortable. The couches and chairs were positioned in such a way that conversations felt stilted, the open floor plan disrupted by too many barriers. So one night, after the guests had gone to their rooms, Iris moved the furniture. Just a little at first. She rearranged the couches into a semicircle that allowed for easier conversation, shifted the chairs closer to the fireplace, and made sure the reading lights created a warm, inviting glow. It was subtle, but effective. The next day, guests lingered longer in the lobby, sitting comfortably in the newly arranged space. They didn't know what had changed, but they felt it. Even some of the staff noticed. Did the designers come in and move things around? May, Thomas's assistant, asked one morning as she walked through the lobby. Looks nicer somehow. But no one could pinpoint what exactly had shifted. It was just better. Iris never sought recognition for her work. She simply did it because it needed to be done, because she took pride in the spaces she cleaned and cared for. But while the staff may not have acknowledged her efforts out loud, they were starting to feel them. The hotel ran more smoothly, things worked the way they should, and everything just looked a little brighter. The guests, too, began to notice, complimenting the hotel on its cleanliness and the welcoming atmosphere. But for all her efforts, Iris remained in the background, her work appreciated but not attributed to her. Thomas certainly didn't notice. He rarely looked at anything other than the numbers on his spreadsheet. He still saw her as cheap labor, a convenience he had plucked off the street to solve a problem. But Iris didn't need his praise. She had turned the Skylark into something better, something more functional, without anyone even realizing it. And though her talents remained hidden in plain sight, the impact of her work was impossible to deny. Thomas Mercer sat at his desk, frowning at the latest financial reports from the Skylark Hotel. The numbers didn't add up, at least not in the way he had expected. He had cut costs, slashed salaries, and squeezed every possible corner he could find, yet the hotel's profits remained stubbornly stagnant. Worse, some of the guest reviews had taken a downturn, complaints about service, long wait times, and a lack of personal touch that he couldn't quite understand. For someone like Thomas, who lived by the bottom line, this felt like a personal affront. The phone buzzed on his desk, but he ignored it, his eyes fixed on the spreadsheet in front of him. The staff had thinned, and the ones who remained were stretched too thin, but they should have been efficient by now. After all, hadn't he given them the motivation they needed? He had thought trimming the fat would lead to a lean, mean operation. Instead, the hotel seemed to be sagging under the pressure, and that infuriated him. He pushed back his chair and strode to the window, glaring down at the busy street below. His eyes briefly landed on the bench across from the hotel, where he had first spotted Iris that fateful day. The memory of hiring her still amused him, even though the joke seemed to be wearing thin. He hadn't expected her to last this long, and the fact that she had remained made her something of an irritation. Lazy, the lot of them, Thomas muttered to himself as he turned back to his desk. Iris's name had come up more than once in passing comments, but he wasn't inclined to pay attention. To him, she was nothing more than a convenient symbol of his own cost-cutting genius, a person who'd take whatever scraps he threw her way and still managed to keep the floors clean. Nothing more, nothing less. At the next staff meeting, Thomas's frustration was palpable. The conference room was cold, silent, as the heads of various departments sat waiting for him to begin. May sat closest to him, scribbling on her notepad, her eyes darting to Thomas every few moments, sensing the storm that was about to hit. Thomas flipped through a few pages of reports before tossing them on the table with a slap that made everyone in the room flinch. "This," he said, his voice low but sharp, "is unacceptable." No one dared speak. "We are supposed to be a high-end hotel." "High-end?" Thomas's voice began to rise. "And yet I'm looking at guest reviews that read like complaints from a budget motel. Delays in room service. Dirty windows in the penthouse suite last week. A guest complained about the lobby not being inviting enough. This isn't a charity, people. It's a business. If we don't turn things around, we'll lose more clients. May bit her lip, her pen poised over her notebook, though she wasn't writing anything. I've given you all the tools you need to make this place work, Thomas continued, pacing in front of the room. I've cut costs, simplified things. What I haven't done is cut corners. But it looks like some of you have. His gaze flicked around the room, and for a moment, it landed on Iris, who stood quietly by the door, holding her cleaning supplies. She's been here longer than some of you, Thomas said with a smirk, jerking his chin toward Iris. I hired her for a laugh, and yet she's still standing. What's your excuse? The room shifted uncomfortably. Iris kept her head down, pretending not to notice the attention on her, though her fingers gripped the handle of her cart a little tighter. The other department heads exchanged glances, but no one spoke up. They had all seen the changes Iris had made, the improvements she had initiated in the background. Some of them had even started to rely on her subtle but effective contributions. But no one dared say it out loud, not while Thomas was in this mood. He wasn't interested in hearing about what was working, he only wanted to lash out at what wasn't. Work harder, Thomas demanded, pacing again. I don't care how you do it, but this hotel needs to be flawless by next month. If we don't start seeing better guest feedback, there will be consequences. His words lingered in the air, heavy and menacing, before he finally dismissed the staff with a flick of his hand. As they filed out, some glanced toward Iris with an awkward, almost apologetic look, but she didn't return their gaze. Instead, she quietly pushed her cart toward the lobby, as if nothing had happened. Despite all his bluster and complaints, Thomas didn't bother to check on the actual day-to-day workings of the hotel. He was too focused on the spreadsheets, too absorbed by what wasn't working to realize that Iris had been doing far more than just mopping floors. Her rearrangements, her quiet repairs, her attention to the small details that made guests feel more comfortable, none of it was on Thomas's radar. He didn't care about the small stuff. He cared about big moves, dramatic changes, and profit margins. The staff, though, had started to notice. May, in particular, had kept an eye on Iris, noticing the way things just seemed to be better. The storerooms were organized, the lobby felt warmer, and even the guests had started to linger longer, chatting in the newly arranged seating areas. May suspected Iris was behind it, but the idea of approaching her, of thanking her for doing what the rest of them hadn't thought to do, seemed impossible in the rigid world Thomas had built. The days passed, and the pressure on the staff grew. Thomas became more erratic, more unpredictable. He started micromanaging the few things he noticed, picking apart trivial issues, blaming his employees for things that were out of their control. He began firing off memos at odd hours, demanding updates, and questioning every decision made by his department heads. But through it all, Iris worked. She remained quiet, unnoticed by Thomas, as she continued to polish and fix and organize. The hotel was running better, but Thomas couldn't see past his frustration to recognize that. In fact, the more the hotel improved in small, unseen ways, the more Thomas seemed to spiral. To him, things should have been obvious. There should have been immediate, visible results, something he could measure. But Iris's changes weren't measurable on paper. They were felt, not seen, and that was something Thomas couldn't grasp. Thomas had always believed that fear was a powerful motivator. If people feared losing their jobs, they'd work harder, be more efficient, and toe the line. So when he felt the hotel wasn't performing up to his standards, despite his demands and threats, he decided it was time for something drastic. Something that would allow him to see exactly what his employees were doing when they thought no one was watching. With a smirk on his face, Thomas approved the installation of hidden surveillance cameras around the hotel. Not in the guest rooms, of course, he wasn't that reckless, but in the staff areas, hallways, and key service locations. He wanted eyes everywhere. The cameras would give him an unfiltered look into his employees' behavior, and if someone was slacking off, he'd catch them. More than that, he'd use the footage to humiliate those who weren't living up to his expectations. For Thomas, it was all about control. If they knew he was always watching, they wouldn't dare step out of line. The cameras went up quietly, without any fanfare. Only a few key staff members knew about them, and even they didn't know the full extent of where they'd been placed. Thomas preferred it that way. Secrecy meant surprise. The hotel continued to run, the staff unaware that every move was being recorded, every conversation potentially scrutinized. Thomas waited a few days before he started reviewing the footage. He was hoping to catch someone, anyone, slacking off, making mistakes, or taking advantage of the relaxed supervision they thought they had. He wanted proof that his frustration was justified, that his employees weren't working hard enough. Late one evening, Thomas sat in his office with the lights dimmed, his laptop open in front of him, and the camera feeds loaded onto his screen. He clicked through each recording with a critical eye, fast-forwarding through sections where nothing seemed amiss. The front desk staff were mostly efficient, but there were moments when they chatted a little too long, took breaks that stretched just beyond what Thomas thought was acceptable. He made mental notes of those he would confront later. As he continued clicking through the footage, fast-forwarding through hours of mundane work, something caught his eye. It was Iris. He almost skipped past her. After all, what could she possibly be doing besides cleaning? But instead of continuing his search for someone to blame, he paused and watched. At first, what he saw didn't surprise him. Iris was going about her usual duties, mopping the floors, wiping down surfaces, and quietly moving from one task to the next with her usual efficiency. But as the footage played on, Thomas noticed something that made him sit up straighter in his chair. It wasn't just that Iris was doing her job well, she was doing far more than her job. In one clip, she was in one of the guest rooms, cleaning as expected. But then she noticed something, a drawer that wouldn't close properly, a handle that had come loose. Instead of ignoring it or reporting it to maintenance, Iris took out a small screwdriver from her cart and fixed it herself. The drawer slid smoothly back into place, and Iris moved on without a second thought. Thomas leaned forward, eyes narrowing. That wasn't her job. He clicked through the footage faster, curious now. In another clip, Iris was rearranging furniture in the lobby, adjusting the placement of chairs and tables with precision. She stepped back, eyeing the space critically, then shifted a chair slightly to the left. It was subtle, but the room suddenly felt more open, more welcoming. And it wasn't just furniture. In another section of footage, Iris was seen quietly fixing a broken light fixture in the staff lounge, then cleaning up the cluttered area, organizing it in a way that no one had thought to do before. She moved quickly, silently, without drawing any attention to herself. Thomas's hand hovered over the mouse as he processed what he was seeing. Iris wasn't just a cleaner, she was practically running the maintenance and upkeep of the hotel by herself. And no one, including Thomas, had noticed. Thomas sat back in his chair, stunned. This was not what he had expected. He had hired Iris as a joke, a way to cut costs and prove a point. Yet here she was, doing the work of multiple people without asking for anything in return. She had fixed broken equipment, reorganized spaces to make them more functional, and gone far beyond the responsibilities he had given her. And she had done it all without complaint, without recognition, and without anyone even knowing. For a moment, Thomas felt something unfamiliar, a pang of discomfort. He had spent weeks mocking Iris, belittling her in front of the staff, thinking she was nothing more than a cheap solution to a problem he didn't care about. But now, as he watched the footage, he couldn't deny that she had single-handedly improved the hotel in ways that his managerial tactics had failed to do. He clicked through more footage, searching for more evidence, and found it again and again. Iris was everywhere, making small but significant improvements, solving problems before they even became noticeable. The hotel was running smoothly not because of his cost-cutting measures, but because of Iris's quiet dedication. Thomas stared at the screen, his mind racing. He couldn't figure out what to do with this information. On one hand, he was impressed, though he'd never admit it out loud. Iris had outsmarted him in a way he hadn't expected. She had found a way to make the hotel better without relying on anyone else, without expecting anything in return. On the other hand, this revelation angered him. Iris wasn't supposed to be the hero of this story. She was supposed to be a cautionary tale, a reminder to the other staff of how replaceable they all were. But now he wasn't sure how to react. Thomas closed the laptop, his jaw tight with frustration. He had been looking for proof of his employees' laziness, their incompetence, and instead, he had found proof of Iris's quiet brilliance. It wasn't what he had wanted, but it was what he had to face. The Skylark Hotel staff gathered in the conference room, the mood tense and uneasy. An emergency meeting called by Thomas Mercer never meant anything good. They had all felt the tightening grip of his frustrations over the past few weeks, with whispered warnings spreading like wildfire among the employees. No one knew exactly what he wanted to address this time, but whatever it was, they were sure it wouldn't be pleasant. Thomas sat at the head of the long table, his face impassive, fingers drumming lightly on the polished wood as he waited for everyone to settle in. May sat to his left, her expression tight, offering no clues as to what was about to unfold. Iris stood near the door, her head slightly bowed, her usual quiet presence blending into the background as it always did. Once the last person slipped into their seat, Thomas straightened in his chair, his eyes scanning the room. His voice, when it came, was calm but carried the weight of someone holding back an undercurrent of frustration. "I called this meeting because there are things happening in this hotel, things that I'm not happy with," he began, his gaze sharp as it moved from one face to the next. "The performance here has been lacking. We've had complaints from guests, slow service, maintenance issues left unresolved. All of this is costing us money." The room was silent, the staff exchanging uneasy glances. Thomas's tone wasn't new, this was his typical approach, starting with a verbal assault to put everyone on edge. But today felt different. Today, there was something behind his words that hinted at more. "I've been watching," Thomas continued, a small smirk forming on his lips. "And I've caught some things on camera that I think you should all see." At the mention of the cameras, a ripple of discomfort passed through the room. Most of the staff hadn't known about the hidden surveillance until now, and the realization that they had been watched in secret made them sit up straighter, nerves tingling. Thomas turned to May, who quietly pressed play on the laptop connected to the large screen at the front of the room. The video feed flickered to life, showing a familiar scene, the lobby of the Skylark, mid-morning, with guests milling about, and Iris, pushing her cleaning cart across the floor. At first, the footage showed nothing extraordinary. Iris moved as she always did, efficient, silent, unobtrusive. She swept the floors, dusted surfaces, and wiped down windows. But then, something changed. The camera caught Iris pausing at one of the guest room doors. She noticed something off, a loose doorknob, and, without hesitation, pulled out a small screwdriver from her cart and tightened it. She tested the knob, ensuring it worked properly, then moved on without drawing any attention to herself. The staff stared at the screen, murmurs rising. Thomas didn't stop the video. The footage cut to another clip, showing Iris quietly rearranging the chairs and tables in the lobby, making the space flow more naturally. The subtle change in the layout had gone unnoticed by most, but now, seeing it from above, it was obvious how much more functional the room had become. Clip after clip played, revealing moments where Iris stepped in and fixed things no one else had bothered to report: burnt-out light bulbs, broken furniture, cluttered storage rooms. She wasn't just doing her job as a cleaner, she was actively maintaining the hotel in ways that saved the staff and the hotel itself time, money, and unnecessary hassle. By the time the last clip played, showing Iris fixing a malfunctioning vending machine in the break room that had been out of order for weeks, the room had gone completely silent. The staff stared at the screen, dumbfounded, processing what they had just seen. Thomas leaned back in his chair, enjoying the stunned expressions around the room. He had initially called this meeting intending to tear down his employees for their perceived failures, but as he'd watched the footage himself, his focus had shifted. He wasn't about to praise Iris, his ego wouldn't allow it, but the revelation of her tireless work had forced him to take a different approach. "Now," he said, his voice cutting through the silence, "what you just saw is something none of you bothered to tell me about. While the rest of you have been content to let things fall apart around you, Iris here has been fixing your mistakes." He gestured toward her, and all eyes in the room turned to Iris, who stood near the door, still and silent. The spotlight on her felt uncomfortable, and she shifted slightly, unsure of what was coming next. "I hired her to do one thing," Thomas continued, "and yet she's been doing the work of several people. She's fixed things that should have been addressed by maintenance. She's made improvements that no one here even noticed. All while being mocked, ignored, and treated like she didn't matter." The staff shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had all seen Iris's work over the past few weeks, but none of them had spoken up. Some had even laughed at her behind her back, assuming she was nothing more than a poor woman desperate for any kind of work. Now, watching the footage, they realized just how wrong they had been. "Do you know how much money we've saved because of her?" Thomas asked, his tone sharper now. "Thousands. Maybe more. Work that would have required outside contractors, repairs that would have delayed operations, all of it handled quietly by Iris. And none of you bothered to give her credit." The room remained silent. No one could meet Iris's gaze now. The few employees who had been most vocal in their mockery of her sat with their heads down, their faces pale. May, seated next to Thomas, had her own emotions roiling under the surface. She had noticed Iris's efforts weeks ago but hadn't said anything, unsure of how it would be received. Now, watching Thomas's performance, she felt a mix of admiration for Iris and shame for the way the hotel had treated her. "Iris," Thomas said finally, turning his full attention to her. "You've been doing more for this hotel than anyone here. And that ends today." For a brief moment, a flicker of fear crossed Iris's face. Had she overstepped? Was this Thomas's way of saying she had been out of line? "You'll no longer be handling these extra duties," Thomas continued, his expression unreadable. "Because I'm promoting you. Effective immediately, you'll be in charge of hotel operations. You'll work directly with May and the rest of the staff to ensure this place runs smoothly, like it should have been from the start." The room erupted in a mix of gasps and whispers. Iris stood frozen, unsure how to respond. Thomas's words seemed almost surreal. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," Thomas said, his gaze sweeping the room one final time. "It's the people you least expect who make the biggest difference." And with that, the meeting was over. The staff began to file out, their minds reeling from what they had just witnessed. But one thing was clear: Iris, the quiet, unnoticed woman who had been mocked and ignored, had just become the heart of the Skylark Hotel's future. Thomas Mercer sat alone in his office, staring out the large window that overlooked the busy street below. The hotel's sleek glass facade reflected the world outside, but inside, the world was shifting in ways Thomas had never anticipated. For the first time in as long as he could remember, Thomas felt the uneasy pang of humility. The emergency meeting had ended hours ago, but the weight of it still hung heavy on his chest. He couldn't shake the image of Iris standing at the back of the room, quiet and unassuming, while the rest of the staff sat in stunned silence. How had he been so blind? He'd hired her as a joke, expecting her to be nothing more than a temporary solution to a problem he didn't care enough to solve. Yet here she was, the backbone of his hotel, the one person who had been holding everything together while he was too focused on the numbers to see the bigger picture. He had never considered himself a man prone to reflection. Business was simple, profits went up or down, people came and went. It wasn't personal. But watching the footage of Iris quietly repairing, reorganizing, and improving the hotel, Thomas couldn't help but feel a pang of something unfamiliar, something almost regretful. He had mocked her, underestimated her, treated her like she was invisible. And all the while, she had been quietly saving his hotel from crumbling. He stood up abruptly, the leather chair creaking under his weight as he paced the length of his office. He hated feeling out of control, hated the idea that he had missed something so important. But there was no denying the truth. Iris was far more than he had given her credit for, and it was time to face that fact. Thomas glanced at the clock on his desk. It was late, but Iris would still be here. She always stayed late, finishing her work long after most of the staff had gone home. Without thinking too much about it, Thomas grabbed his jacket and headed toward the service areas, where he knew he'd find her. He found Iris in the staff lounge, wiping down the countertops and tidying up the clutter left behind by the day's shift. Her movements were methodical, precise, like everything she did. She didn't notice him at first, too focused on her work, but when she turned around and saw him standing in the doorway, she froze. "Iris," Thomas said, his voice more tentative than he intended. She looked at him, her expression neutral, waiting. For a moment, Thomas didn't know what to say. He had never been good at apologies, and this situation was even more complicated. How did you apologize to someone for underestimating them, for mocking them without a second thought? He wasn't even sure where to begin. He started, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "I wanted to talk to you about earlier." Iris didn't move, but she didn't turn away either. She stood there, quietly waiting, her eyes steady on his. Thomas cleared his throat and forced himself to continue. "I'm not good at this sort of thing, so I'll just say it straight. I was wrong. About you. About everything." He paused, trying to gauge her reaction, but Iris remained impassive. He wasn't sure if she could read his lips clearly, but she was watching him carefully, her brow furrowed just slightly. "I hired you because I thought, well, it doesn't matter why. What matters is that I was wrong. You've done more for this hotel than anyone else, and I didn't see it. I didn't appreciate it." The words felt clumsy on his tongue, but at least they were out now. "You've held this place together while I was too busy trying to force things my way. And for that, I owe you an apology." There. He'd said it. The apology hung between them, awkward and unfinished, but it was the best he could manage. Iris didn't respond right away. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded, just once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. It wasn't much, but Thomas felt an odd sense of relief wash over him. "I also wanted to talk to you about something else," he said, shifting gears, eager to move past the uncomfortable part of the conversation. "I want to offer you a promotion. Something more suited to your skills." Iris blinked, clearly surprised, though she didn't say anything. Thomas pressed on, gaining a little confidence now. "You've been doing more than just cleaning. I've seen it, fixing things, improving the way the hotel operates, making changes that I didn't even notice but should have. You've been running this place behind the scenes, and I think it's time you got the recognition for that. I want to make you the new operations manager." Iris's eyes widened slightly. She hadn't expected this. Not from Thomas, not after everything that had happened. She studied his face for a moment, trying to read whether he was serious or if this was just another one of his games. But he looked sincere, uncomfortable, yes, but sincere. "I know it's a lot to think about," Thomas added quickly, suddenly unsure if he'd overstepped. "But you're more than capable. And you've already been doing half the job anyway. This just makes it official." Iris still didn't speak, but her expression softened just a little. She looked down, her hands fidgeting slightly with the rag she held, and then she nodded again, this time with more certainty. Thomas felt a strange sense of satisfaction. He hadn't expected this conversation to go well, but somehow, it had. Iris had accepted his apology, at least, as much as he could expect, and she was willing to consider the promotion. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. Good, Thomas said, trying to regain some of his usual confidence. I'll have May draw up the paperwork. You'll be working directly with me from now on, overseeing the day-to-day operations. We'll talk more about the details later. Iris nodded once more, and Thomas turned to leave, but something stopped him at the door. He turned back, glancing over his shoulder at her. And Iris, he added, his voice softer now. Thank you. For everything. She didn't say anything, but this time, she smiled. Just a small, quiet smile, but it was enough. Iris stood in the hallway of the Skylark Hotel, the familiar hum of daily operations surrounding her. Only now, things felt different. She'd been promoted before, in different jobs, in different places, but this was something else. This was the first time anyone had ever truly noticed her work, her skills, her dedication, and rewarded it. Even though the road to this point had been rocky, Iris was ready. She hadn't sought out this role, but it fit her naturally, like a jacket she hadn't realized was hanging in her closet all along. The promotion had come with its challenges, of course. Iris wasn't one for grand gestures or loud proclamations, but she knew the staff had seen her in a certain way for too long. Some of them, the ones who had once laughed behind her back, still carried the same expressions of doubt. A few even resented her new position, feeling like they should have been considered before her. She felt those stares, but she'd learned long ago how to move past them. What mattered now was what she could do. She started small, meeting with each department head individually, listening to their concerns, and asking them what they needed. Some approached her with hesitation, others with awkward apologies for things they had said or done in the past. Iris accepted them with grace but didn't linger on them. She wasn't here to dwell on the past, she was here to make things work. Within the first few weeks, Iris's impact became obvious. She approached the hotel's daily operations with the same attention to detail she had used when scrubbing floors and fixing broken furniture. Only now, she had the authority to streamline processes and implement real changes. She started in the areas she knew best, the physical spaces of the hotel. The cluttered storerooms were reorganized, not just by her but by a team she'd trained to handle the details with the same care she had always given. Guest room layouts were subtly adjusted to enhance both comfort and style, and the maintenance schedule was tightened so that small problems didn't become bigger ones down the line. These were small, quiet changes, but they added up quickly. The front desk, too, was reorganized. Iris noticed how stressed the receptionists often were, juggling multiple tasks at once while trying to remain pleasant for guests. She worked with them to create a more efficient check-in process, delegating tasks that could be handled by other staff, freeing up time for genuine interaction with guests. In a hotel, those brief moments of kindness made all the difference. Within a month, the first wave of guest reviews came in, and they were glowing. People noted how clean and welcoming the hotel felt, how they felt cared for by the staff, and how efficient everything seemed to run. Iris read those reviews quietly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She didn't need praise from the guests, but seeing their satisfaction was enough to keep her pushing forward. Thomas, meanwhile, watched Iris's progress with a mix of admiration and discomfort. He wasn't used to being wrong, certainly not about people. And while he had given Iris the promotion, part of him still bristled at how the whole thing had played out. He liked to think of himself as a man in control, someone who could see the bigger picture. Yet here was Iris, a woman he had hired without a second thought, quietly proving him wrong at every turn. Still, Thomas couldn't deny the results. The hotel was performing better than it had in years, and the staff, though still adjusting, seemed more engaged than before. Iris's calm, steady leadership had a way of easing tension, and while Thomas was uncomfortable with how things had played out, he found himself begrudgingly respecting her. He watched her during meetings, noting how she never wasted words, never spoke unless she had something meaningful to contribute. When she did speak, it was with quiet authority, her words carefully chosen. And unlike him, Iris didn't need to dominate a room to get people to follow her. Her leadership was natural, something that made people trust her without her having to demand it. That kind of respect, Thomas realized, couldn't be forced. It had to be earned. One afternoon, Thomas found himself standing by the lobby, watching Iris speak with one of the housekeepers. The two women stood by a newly rearranged seating area, Iris gesturing calmly as she explained how the furniture placement could enhance the guest's experience. The housekeeper nodded, clearly absorbing everything Iris said. It was a small moment, but it struck Thomas how far Iris had come, how far she had brought the hotel. Later that day, Thomas approached her office, feeling the familiar knot of discomfort tightening in his chest. He knocked lightly, and when Iris looked up from her work, he stepped inside. "How's it going?" he asked, trying for a casual tone. Iris gave him a small nod and gestured to the paperwork in front of her. "Busy," she said simply, her voice steady, though he could tell she wasn't entirely at ease. Thomas nodded, lingering awkwardly in the doorway. "I've been looking at the latest reviews," he said, stuffing his hands in his pockets. "They're good. Really good." Iris smiled slightly but didn't respond, her eyes meeting his with quiet expectation. "Look, I know I didn't handle things the best way when you first came on board," Thomas admitted, his voice dropping. "But you've done more for this place than I ever expected. More than I even realized was possible." Iris's smile grew, just a little, and she nodded, accepting his words without comment. She didn't need a lengthy explanation or apology. His acknowledgement was enough. "You've earned this," Thomas said, a touch of respect coloring his voice. "I know it's been an adjustment for everyone, but you've done an incredible job." Iris's eyes softened, and she gave him a small nod of appreciation. Thomas took a breath, then added, "I'll try to stay out of your way from now on. You seem to know what you're doing better than I do." It was the closest thing to a compliment Thomas could muster, and Iris seemed to understand that. She nodded again, her smile gentle but clear. As Thomas left her office, he felt a shift in his perspective, something small but significant. Iris wasn't just someone who had exceeded his expectations, she had shown him a different way of leading, of managing people, and for the first time, Thomas found himself learning from someone he had once written off. It wasn't an easy pill to swallow, but it was one he knew he had to. The seasons had shifted by the time the Skylark Hotel settled into its new rhythm. What had once been a place plagued by silent tensions and festering frustrations had transformed into something far greater under Iris's quiet, determined leadership. The small but significant changes she had implemented over the past few months had not only revived the hotel's operations but had also breathed new life into its staff. Where there had once been whispers of doubt and resentment, there was now a sense of unity, a shared purpose that echoed through the halls. The lobby, which had once felt cold and disconnected, was now a space that guests lingered in, sipping coffee, reading newspapers, and chatting with one another in the newly arranged seating area. The front desk staff greeted each guest with genuine warmth, their previous stress eased by the systems Iris had put in place. The housekeeping team worked more efficiently, and the maintenance crew, once bogged down by an endless list of repairs, now functioned with a sense of pride, knowing that Iris's watchful eye would catch any issue before it spiraled out of control. Even the hotel's online reviews, which had once been a point of contention, had turned into glowing testimonials. Guests praised everything from the seamless check-in process to the cleanliness of the rooms. Many noted the feeling of being truly cared for during their stay, an intangible quality that Iris had quietly cultivated without ever stepping into the spotlight. For Thomas, it was an unexpected revelation. He had always viewed the hotel through the lens of numbers and profits, reducing it to spreadsheets and cost analyses. But now, watching the Skylark thrive in ways he hadn't anticipated, he understood what he had nearly thrown away. Iris had taught him that there was more to running a business than cutting corners and demanding results. Sometimes, it was about allowing people the space to do their best work, to find their own rhythm. One evening, Thomas found himself in the hotel lobby, observing the space with fresh eyes. It was full of life, guests coming and going with a sense of ease. He watched as one of the receptionists, who had been new when Iris took over, skillfully handled a complicated booking request without so much as a hint of frustration. Across the room, a bellhop was helping an elderly couple with their luggage, his smile genuine and warm. The air was different now, lighter somehow, and Thomas knew it had nothing to do with the furniture or the lighting. It was the people, their newfound energy, their dedication to making the hotel more than just a stopover. Thomas's gaze drifted to Iris, who stood near the elevator, speaking quietly with one of the maintenance workers. Even from a distance, her presence was commanding, though in the subtlest way possible. She didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to demand respect, it was given to her naturally. Watching her, Thomas felt a familiar pang of discomfort. It wasn't regret exactly, but something close to it. He had almost lost everything because of his arrogance, his inability to see the value of someone like Iris. As Iris finished her conversation and began to walk toward the back offices, Thomas caught up with her. "Iris," he said, his voice casual but carrying more weight than usual. She turned to him, her expression calm as always, though there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there in the early days. "I've been meaning to tell you," Thomas started, feeling the words catch in his throat for a moment. "The hotel. It's doing better than I could have imagined." Iris waited, sensing there was more. "I almost ruined this place," Thomas admitted, his voice quieter now. "If it weren't for you, we wouldn't be standing here. You saved this hotel, Iris." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his. She had heard words like this before, apologies wrapped in compliments, but this time, there was something genuine in his tone, something unguarded. "You gave me the chance," she said simply, and for Iris, that was the truth. She hadn't needed grand gestures or long-winded speeches. What she needed was the opportunity to prove herself, and Thomas, begrudgingly or not, had given her that. It was enough. Thomas nodded, grateful for her grace, for the way she always managed to make things seem so simple. He was still learning, still figuring out how to navigate this new dynamic, but for once, he felt like he was on the right path. "You've earned the respect of everyone here," Thomas said, glancing around the bustling lobby. "And mine too. I wanted you to know that." Iris offered him a small smile, not one of triumph but of quiet acknowledgement. She wasn't in this for the accolades. Her satisfaction came from the work, from knowing that she had made something better, more efficient, and more humane. That was enough for her. As the months passed, Iris's influence only grew. The staff began to approach her not just with questions about their tasks but with ideas, suggestions on how to make things even better. And she listened, always encouraging them to take ownership of their roles, to take pride in their contributions. Iris wasn't just running the hotel, she was inspiring it, helping the people around her see their own worth in a way that few leaders ever could. Guests began to recognize her too, though not in the way one might recognize a CEO or a front-facing executive. They didn't know her by name, but they felt her presence in the way things ran smoothly, in the way problems seemed to fix themselves before they even became noticeable. Iris had become the invisible thread that tied everything together, a symbol of quiet strength and resilience. And though she never sought the limelight, it found her in small, meaningful ways. A guest would ask for her specifically, mentioning that they had heard about her from another guest. A staff member would publicly thank her during a meeting, acknowledging that her guidance had made their job easier. Even Thomas, in his own way, would step back and defer to her expertise, a silent gesture of respect that didn't go unnoticed by anyone. The once deafened silence around Iris had been replaced with admiration, not just for her work but for who she was. She had shown everyone, Thomas included, that value didn't come from appearances or from fitting into preconceived molds. It came from within, from the work itself, from dedication and heart. As the Skylark Hotel continued to thrive, Iris remained a constant, a quiet leader who had proven that true strength didn't need to shout to be heard.